This will be the FLT Flight Data Episode 1 video. Today we're going to cover lots of the tasks, mostly the PCG and some tasks in the PCG. We're not going to go through every single definition in the PCG or answer every question. We're just going to expand upon the highlights. The rest will be up to you to do the research. Again, this is your PCG here. Each one is tailored specifically for each position. You're going to have the flight data FLT, you're going to have ground control, and then you're going to have low control and CT. If you can see up here at the top, it's going to be a 3-level portion, a prior rated controller, and then a prior rated that's in that like facility. So you're going to have 34 days to complete this PCG. That's going to include answering all the questions, completing all of the knowledge and performance standards. You can read in this section here how to use the PCG, the certification procedures, initial training evaluations, conducting training, testing procedures. All tests are like Air Force tests, 80% or better for air traffic control. Documentation stuff, training times. You're going to have live training, simulator training, and non-positional, also known as one-on-one training. Live training will be anytime that you're in the tower cab plugged in position, actively talking to either aircraft or answering phone lines signed onto that position. Simulator time will be anytime you're with a trainer, one-on-one, either on a static board or in the simulator system. And then one-on-one time will be anytime you're out of position, either doing a debrief or going over one-on-one over tasks within the PCG. Under performance and qualification standards terminology, with assistance from the tower team, that means you can use other positions in the facility to accomplish tasks. Another standard is going to be without assistance or error. There will be some tasks that are going to be completely up to you to accomplish alone on yourself, but prior to getting rated. And that means that there's going to be tasks that you should be able to perform without anybody else's assistance. Minimum assistance means you might have some prompting from other positions or your trainer to accomplish the task. Under flight data, you're going to see a slew of tasks here, STS items. They correspond with your CFETP, and each task is specific and unique for Edwards and how we accomplish those tasks. Other tasks are going to be more universal and going to be able to transfer to any Air Force base. We're going to go down to the task itself. The PCG and all those STS tasks are broken down into similar tasks. Here you're going to see task 1 at the top, and then under task 1, specific STS task items that are associated and grouped under task 1. And then so on and so forth, all the way through the end of the PCG. These are given to you in an order in which you should read them and learn them, designed from the least complex, more broad range items to the most complex items for that position. So now we're going to kind of go into task 1 and kind of break down stuff from there. Facility publications, instrument flight information publications, and electronic information. As a trainee, you're going to spend a lot of your time getting information from the SharePoint. Here's a look what the SharePoint looks like. You're going to have the master training plan. This should be everything you need for your training to be accomplished from the actual resources. And then over here, you're going to have publications. These are brought down by PCGs. You're going to have your PCGs here. They're clickable, and you'll be able to download the PDF if you need to. Training forms, these are going to mostly be for your trainers. QTPs, again, this is going to be for more upgrade training when you want to get certified to run the TSS simulator system, when you become an air traffic trainer, and so on. Additional documents, you're going to have the CFETP, which is the location of all those STS task items. The MTTR, which is going to be a document you're going to use to correlate the actual specific lines. If we go back to your PCG, on the right-hand side, you see MTTR, and then number 3. So line 3 on the MTTR is going to give you every single item that you need to have to get the knowledge you need for that system. And so you'll find all of your documents over here, publications on the right-hand side, and they're in order in which of authority. So the FAA provides the highest authority for air traffic control for us. Below them is the Air Force instructions. The Air Force instructions are going to be in addition to the FAA instructions. They will not limit or go away from the FAA instructions, but they will enhance things specifically for the Air Force in general. Then you have local regulations, and local regulations are in addition to the AFIs, giving you more localized things specifically for your base. And then you're going to have letter of agreements and operations letters between facilities and between your own facility. From there, we're going to go through the FLIPs. The FLIPs are flight instrument publications. What those are is they're aids for pilots to know how to fly, and aids for you to know how pilots need to fly under IFR conditions, to do IFR approaches to the bases. Edwards Air Force Base is a VFR tower, which means all of our aircraft will be doing simulated IFR approaches or simulated instrument approaches. This could be a whole topic on itself, but this is an example of one of the many flips that we have for Edwards Air Force Base. This is the high ILS localizer DME to runway 23 left. It tells the pilots here what channel to get into, the frequency to be able to pick up the ILS for this approach. Gives you a bunch of different information about the runway landing surface, the airport elevation, the ATIS code frequencies, the radar facility that's in charge most of the time, and then our tower frequency, ground frequencies. This tells them how to come in the airfield and do their approach. So they're going to come down the center line, down to the runway, and they're picking up this localizer right here. And they're going to fly down there over certain altitudes at certain times. Down here it explains specifically they need to be at or above 4,100. That's what the 4,100 is right here with the line underneath. That means at or above that altitude in order to pick up the localizer for this type of approach. The next thing we're going to go into is going to be the trainer versus trainee responsibilities. As a trainee, it's your responsibility to find the knowledge using the MTTR and all the other supported documentation that you have. Use that MTTR to find the regulations and answers to these questions. It's your trainer's job to show you how to get to those areas, to any answers you can't find, how to find those answers, and then how to expand upon those answers to teach you how to use those answers to either answer the questions specifically or how they apply practically in the tower cab environment. Now we're going to go down to task 2. Actually, before we get to task 2, there's a section up here that talks about LOAs and ops letters. Ops letters are going to be any letter that's going to be done for specific operations that you're going to have for an aircraft operations, whether they're doing a specific mission that's going to be in the tower's pattern or the tower's airspace. And then an LOA is going to be a letter of agreement between one facility to another. So the tower and the radar facility might have a letter of agreement, or the tower and airfield management might have a letter of agreement that specifically goes over how we're going to interact with each other in the airfield environment under certain circumstances. Task 2, team position responsibilities. The tower team concept. The tower team concept and intent is there's no absolute division of responsibilities regarding position operations. This means that the tower team as a whole is responsible for accomplishing the task of controlling aircraft, getting them safely to the runway, in the air, on the ground, and then back home. Within that, each position has its own set responsibilities. For flight data, you're going to operate interphones. You're going to process and forward flight plan information, compile statistical data, assist the tower cab in meeting situational objectives, observe and report weather information, and utilize alphanumerics. And what that basically means is your job is the primary resource for any outside agency to get information from the control tower. So they're going to call you asking about flight plan information, departures, arrival times, where certain aircraft are at. They're going to also notify you things that is going on around the airfield that you need to pass to other positions, whether or not there's an active airspace that's going to be happening, whether or not there's going to be a mission coming in or a special aircraft that's coming in later for the day. You need to make sure you record that information and pass it along to the appropriate positions. Supervisory notification requirements. What this basically means is anytime that you think there's something that you need to pass along, and in flight data, there's almost nothing that is specifically for flight data. Flight data is taking information from outside agencies and passing along to internal agencies, whether it be ground control, local control, or the watch soup. And the rule of thumb basically is if it has something to do with ground operations, it's going to happen in the near future, it's going to go to ground. If it's an airborne operation, it's going to go to local control if it's going to be within the hour or so. And then if it's beyond outside of hour, then it needs to go to the watch soup. So the watch soup can write that information down and disseminate it as he sees fit for future operations. Now we're going to slide down to task 3. On task 3, you see CRM terminology, application of CRM principles. And here CRM is one of the most important sections that you're going to have in the Air Force, and just as an airman in general. You can find that document on the SharePoint like we talked about before. Down here, it should be on the left-hand side, CRM IP. You can click this link right here, and hopefully you can see it. You can click that link right there, and that link will send you to the CRM IP document. And the document is a conducive document with lots of information, and that point of that document is to give you situational awareness. And situational awareness is probably one of the most important things that you're going to have in the tower cab environment. Situational awareness is the effective use of all available resources, people, weapon systems, facilities, and equipment environmental by individuals or crews to safely and efficiently accomplish assigned mission or task. Situational awareness is going to expand much more upon that in the CRM IP, and it's a good document to read from cover to cover, not necessarily answering specific questions, although there are specific definitions that you need to answer within the knowledge standard and task validation. As you can see here, right here it says knowledge standard and task evaluation. These questions right here are questions that you need to answer in the documents that are provided by the MTTR, and then it says your standard is without assistance. So by the time you get certified in this task, you need to know what CRM is without assistance. You need to be able to tell your trainer what situational awareness is. You're going to have to tell them how are you going to define situational awareness and the loss of situational awareness. How you're going to use different items within your position to regain situational awareness. That could be done through surveying your whole position, looking at all the things that you have, whether it be your IDS-5, which we'll get into later, that has all of your weather data, whether it be your strip management, ETVS operations, or any notes you have in that position. All those things can help you re-accomplish your situational awareness for that position. It's going to differ depending on the situation you're in and which position you're at. The biggest thing to take away from situational awareness and CRM IP is going to be, don't be afraid to ask questions. If there is information that you are supposed to have knowledge on or that you need to have answers for, if an outside agency is calling you and asking for information that you do not have the answer to, you need to put them on hold, and then you need to find that information. Whether you pull that information out within your own position, or you utilize local or ground control if they're not busy, or then your other resort is going to the watch soup. You don't want to be afraid to ask the watch soup questions. It's better to ask a question that you may feel is a dumb question or stupid or redundant question. It's better to ask that question than to give an outside agency the wrong answer. Oftentimes that can lead to other agencies conducting missions based off of false information, or airplanes filing flight plans and them getting delayed unduly because we didn't want to ask a question we were afraid. Going down to task 4, pre-duty familiarization procedures, notice to airmen, and transfer of position of responsibility. So within here, pre-duty familiarization needs to be accomplished. It's going to be accomplished prior to you starting your workday, your duty shift. So you're going to come in the tower, you're going to check your emails, and then you're going to head to the 4th floor. And on the 4th floor, the watch supervisor that's in charge of your shift is going to give you a briefing. The briefing is going to include any possible weather that you're going to experience, which runway we're using that day, any special missions that were happening, any special NOTAMs. NOTAMs we can get into later, but NOTAMs are a notice to airmen. They're going to be special advisories that are for the airfield for that point of time, whether it be a certain taxiway being closed, certain amount of lights being out of service, or anything like that. So you're going to go over everything you need to know in your pre-duty familiarization brief prior to stepping up into the tower cab and taking position. It is a requirement to do so. Including with that is going to be the RIF, recent information file. That's going to be additional items that may have changed in the last time you were at work. You have to sign off on that every single time before you take position, just to see if there's any new policies or procedures about how we do things. The FAA sends out notices, as well as the Air Force, about changes that are happening. And then in those changes, you need to be able to identify that information so that you can utilize it prior to going into position. Transfer of position responsibility, that's where you brief another controller that's going to relieve you from that position. You're going to get much more into that, but the point of it is that both the controller being relieved and the relieving controller are responsible for all information passed. So you need to make sure you document everything you can while you're in position, and then when you're transferring from one position to another, before you leave that position, after you give the brief, you need to step back, resurvey everything, and make sure you didn't miss anything to pass on. Also to note, if you look up here under the tasks, you have the STS task. To the right of it, you have closed, or open. That means that this task is a task only for flight data if it's closed. If it's open, that means that you're going to have this in another position beyond this, which is going to be flight ground control. And then if it's still open in ground, you're going to transfer that all the way to local. And that means that there's items that are specifically unique to that position for transfer of position responsibility. Going down to task 5, apply ATC communication procedures, apply inter and intra facility coordination, operate radios, landlines, operate intercoms, radio frequency channelization. And so radio and landlines, you're going to have radio, which is frequencies, and landlines. They're all going to be operated off the same system. So they're all going to look the same mostly to you. But the point is that they are actually in different systems. You can see here in this Alamy picture that we got here of the ETVS. Your ETVS is going to look very similar to this. Over here, you're going to have a section of ring lines. Those are going to be land lines, as you're known to use them. And they're going to be specific lines that call a specific place. Or it's going to be a specific line, like you see these down here, that are going to be open lines, like any phone line where you can click it and then dial a number from there. On the left-hand side, these are all going to be specific frequencies. So as flight data and FLT, you're not going to be looking at these too much, or you shouldn't be listening to these. These ones are going to be listened for ground control and local control. Over on the right-hand side, you're going to have the option to monitor. There'll be a section on your ATVS that'll say local, watch soup, ground control, and soft. And so that way you can click on that button and you'll hear everything that that position's hearing, whether it be an intercom or whether it be a radio frequency. Inter-facility coordination is actually coordination between you and an outside agency via a landline. That's going to be anytime you call airfield management or current ops. Intra-facility coordination is anytime you're communicating via the ETVS with another position. It's basically a hotline in their ear where you click it and it automatically opens up a communication between you and that position via your headset. Operate radio and landlines is the same thing as we've been talking. Intercoms is the intra-facility part of the coordination. You're going to use those intercoms to do that. And radio and frequency channelization, there's going to be separate channels for each position. Within that, you're going to have definitions about should, shall, aircraft, will, may, need not to know, and approved. So there's different things you're going to have to know for that. You can look up those definitions, and they're pretty self-explanatory. Your trainer will be able to, or in our next episode, we'll be able to deep dive into that if you need any answers to that, any questions that you need answered. Right now, we're going to slide down to task 6. I wasn't able to pull up any information or an image from home on the CSE. That's something that's kind of a good hands-on thing, but the central scheduling system is how Edwards tracks all of their aircraft and their aircraft operations. There's a section, and that's going to be current ops. That section is going to have all your proposed flights for the day. That is actually ran completely by current ops, and they're the ones we call if we have any sort of scheduling issues or we have to move times for those. Aircraft have to go back to park. We're going to call conform for that. There's another section that's going to be the cleared to ground section and then a departed section. The cleared to ground section is going to be where you highlight an aircraft that's taxiing out. You clear them to the ground section. Sport sees that. The radar facility sees that you've cleared them over. They're going to input the squawk, and then they're going to pass it along. When an aircraft departs, it's your job on the CSE to click depart on the CSE, and that tells all the maintainers. It tells everybody else that's tracking that aircraft that it's now airborne and other things can happen. They set maintenance scheduling based on how long they're airborne, and they use the CSE to track a lot of that information. Assigning beacon codes. Typically, the flight data position will never assign beacon codes. They will input or transfer beacon codes from another facility. It's going to come from two radar facilities. It's going to come from Joshua Approach or from Sport. We'll get into those places more in depth as we go on. But it's very specific about making sure that you know where the squawks are coming from. Sport's going to input almost all the squawks into the CSE system. If Sport happens to be closed, you're going to contact Joshua Approach, and then they'll give you a squawk to put in the system. It's your job to then, once it's in the system, to let the appropriate position know. Mostly it's going to be ground control. What that squawk is available so they can pass it along to the aircraft. Coordinate aircraft movement. Anytime that there's going to be a situation where you need to pass information on to flight data or airfield management, that's your job to do that. Typically, if it's going to be aircraft that are not in the CSE, is aircraft that you're going to pass along departure arrival times to airfield management, but there might be other situations where they're specifically tracking it for a specific reason. If there's ever a problem with scheduling, an aircraft's not where they're supposed to be, then you need to be able to call Conform, and Conform is going to be the facility that does all the scheduling. I'm going to jump back up real quick to task 5 and talk about interphone phraseology and communication procedures for it. When you call another facility, you need to let them know who you are, or if it's a direct line to another facility, they're going to let you know who they are when they call. So, or when they answer. If you call it down to airfield management, they're going to say airfield management, and then you're going to give the information that you need to give. They're going to respond to that information, whether they say Roger or they read back that information specifically. And then when you terminate the transmission, you're going to terminate that with your operating initials. So for myself, I'm NK. I'm going to terminate that operating phone call with November Kilo, and they know that it's terminated. And then they're also going to give their initials after that. So that way we have a recording of who passed what information when, and we always have that information on file. We can always go back to and look up for later. It also talks about time in here. As long as you're in the Air Force, you're going to use the UTC or Zulu time. That's going to be the same time across the entire world. That way there's nothing about time zones or local time versus standard time or UTC time. You're always going to be talking about UTC time unless specifically requested for a local departure time. Whenever we pass along information, it's always going to be in UTC or Zulu time. We're never going to be passing information along via local time unless they specifically are requested to do so. ATC facilities. So now we're going to go into your air traffic control facilities. Describe what an ATC or an MRU is. An air traffic control facility is going to be any facility that has FAA regulations requiring its use. So Edwards Tower is an ATC facility. Joshua Approach is going to be their radar facility, the FAA radar facility that's in charge of the 2515 when Sport is closed. Sport is a radar facility that's just outside our airspace. Anything outside the Class D within the 2515 is going to be Sport. I'll show you the diagrams now. So you're going to have Edwards Class D airspace. We'll get into Edwards Class D in a little bit more here in a minute. And then outside that, you're going to have the 2508 complex. You can see it pulled up here. In our airspace, there's the 2508, which is a restricted area owned by the Navy. The Navy owns all of this airspace within here, and they have loaned out certain portions of it to us. And who is mostly in charge of this airspace is going to mostly be Joshua Approach. They also are in charge of airspace that's outside the 2508. There are Navy facilities that will take over charge of certain chunks of airspace as mission dictates. The 2515 is one of them for the Air Force. So the Air Force radar facility that takes care of us is going to be Sport, and they take care of the 2515, and they also take care of sometimes outside the 2515 a little bit, depending on mission requirements and necessity. But that's the facility that's going to be our primary communications. They're handling most of our aircraft that are going to be departing from Edwards, and we utilize them to the maximum extent possible, they will be your primary source of contact for any operations. But they are MRU, which means they do not have the same requirements as FAA facilities. They're a military range unit, which they have very defined responsibilities. However, separation is the biggest key. They are not required to provide separation between other aircraft. They give advisories about other aircraft, but don't provide separation. They also can't work aircraft under IMC or instrument meteorological conditions, which basically is IFR. So if it's IFR and there's clouds or there's rain, heavy rain, and visibility is reduced beyond VFR conditions, they're no longer allowed to control air traffic in that area. They have to pass the whole airspace over to the Joshua approach facility, and then they'll be required for separation. That's the main difference between Joshua approach and to sport. The SOF is a supervisor of flying. They're going to be our point of contact between our aircraft that are flying in the airspace and the ops group commander. The ops group commander is responsible for the airplanes that are flying for the day. The SOF is our intermediary that can handle most questions about certain things that are happening operational wise. If we have questions, if there's concerns, we're going to pass that information through the SOF about aircraft operations. He will decide whether or not that information needs to go up higher to the ops group commander, or whether or not he's going to just make a call right there saying, hey, look, we can do this right now. We can cover it. We can fix it. The SOF is not located in the tower at the moment. They're located in another facility, and it changes daily, and we have to find that out daily. Your watch soup has that information. DV notification requirements. Our DV notification requirements are with the AM Ops. We may be required to identify or to remind other facilities when DVs come inbound, but we'll have the greatest sense of that. If we don't know the information, we can't find it, but someone needs to know it right now, we're going to call a radar facility and request that information, where that location of that aircraft is at. Our requirement is going to be primarily within 15, prior to 15 flying miles, we have to let our AM Ops know of any DV aircraft that are inbound. We don't do very much aeromedical notification procedures, but you'll find the definition of that in our local regulations. Going down here to field elevation. Field elevation, as we showed earlier on the flips, field elevation is determined by the greatest height on the runway, so on the main landing surface. So at Edwards Air Force Base is 2311, and that's going to be 2,311 feet, and it's on the actual runway. There may be higher points on the airfield, but the field elevation is taken from the runway specifically at the highest point at our departure end of runway 23 left. Class D airspace for Edwards Air Force Base. We have a unique Class D airspace. Our Class D airspace is not like the defined one within the 7110.65. Our airspace is 7 nautical miles, which means 7 miles from the center of our runway outbound in a complete circle is our airspace up to 2,500 feet AGL, which is 4,800 feet MSL. That's our airspace. It's 2 miles greater in every direction than a normal Class D is defined. That's because we have so much airspace. We have the lake beds, and we need that airspace to conduct the operations that we have at Edwards Air Force Base. ATC clearance requirements and operate within the Class D airspace. There's two-way radio communication prior to entering the Class D. That's required. So aircraft must contact us prior to entering our airspace unless they have radio failure issues. What's unique about Edwards Class D or A Class D airspace is it's a VFR airspace, which means we are not responsible for airborne separation. That is a huge difference over a Class B airspace. So a Class D airspace, we're required to give advisory notifications of traffic advisories or any sort of hazards, but we are not required to tell an aircraft specifically how to avoid that obstacle or aircraft. We are responsible for runway separation. We have reduced runway separation, which you'll get into a lot more once you get into local control. However, there are specific requirements depending on the weight class of the aircraft prior to landing on the runway. If we pull up the airfield diagram here, so on your airfield diagram, this is runway 23 left. There are specific requirements when an aircraft lands. If they come down the runway, another aircraft cannot land or touch down behind that aircraft unless there's a certain amount of separation that's required. and that is our responsibility. If you break runway separation, you will lose your ratings, possibly your career. So it's a really big deal for us, and it's really our only separation requirement within the Class D airspace. We are required to issue traffic advisories as we can, which most of the time means we have the time to do it, and so we are required to do that. The National Airspace System, as we get up to here, when we pull back up the 2508 complex, right here, let's see, the 2508 complex, you're going to have here, outside of the restricted area, is the National Airspace System. That's where all your airliners are going to go. That's where you're going to have general aviation aircraft flying around. Now, there are certain portions of the 2508 complex that are only active at certain altitudes. Every one of them is different. Some of them are grouped up to have the same restrictions. For instance, in this area right here of the Isabella MOA ATC-AA, in here you can fly a general aviation aircraft below 14,000 feet without talking to any radar facility at all, or any air traffic facility, as long as you remain outside Class D airspaces that are within that. But all of that is part of the National Airspace System. Maintaining surveillance of the movement area, of the surface area. The surface area for us is going to be the entire airfield. That's the surface area for us. It's the surface to 4,800 MSL within 7 nautical miles of Edwards Air Force Base. It's our job to maintain surveillance of that, to look around, to identify hazards, to pass along any sort of information that we have of that, whether it be birds or FOD operations that are on the runway. Taxiways, on task 9, this will be our last task for today. Taxiways, runways, helipads, ramps, parking areas, maintaining surveillance of the control movement area, which is different than the surface area, and hydrazine areas. Describing runways, taxiways, and overruns. Let me get to my notes real quick on those. Okay, so at Edwards Air Force Base, we have 4 main runways. North Base runway, let me pull up the airfield diagram here. Doesn't show it here. We pull up the Class D. Okay, you're going to have 4 main runways at Edwards Air Force Base. You have runway 23 left, runway 23 right, South Base runway 25, and North Base runway 24. So that's 4 hard surface landing areas. Those 4 hard surface landing areas are our primary landing runways. Our Cessnas, or Aero Club aircraft, they're light civil aircraft. That's part of the aerospace or Aero Club. They fly only out of here. They can land on the main runways up in here, but they primarily fly out of South Base. They have set departure and arrival routes that you'll get into later once you get towards local control, but they're specifically designed to not interfere with our main base aircraft operations. We have different restrictions for runway 23 right, depending on aircraft weight class, what their aircraft specifically is, and then what their mission is, depending on what's going on. Runway 23 left is our primary landing and departure runway for most aircraft that we have. And then up here at North Base, this is a specific runway for specific operations, and it needs OG approval if they're aircraft that normally do not operate out of there. We use it for special missions, UAV operations, things like that. You're also going to see at Edwards, which is specifically unique for us, is our lakebed runways. Our lakebed runways is only at Edwards. We have several lakebed runways. We used to have 18. We have less than 18 now. But you see these runways here. They're labeled on this diagram. They intersect and cross all of the lakebed. This provides a unique opportunity for Edwards to operate operations when winds are greater than certain aircraft can handle for crosswinds. So we can land aircraft on lakebed runway 30 left or right, for example, over here. We can also land aircraft on lakebed runway 623 if they need a long landing runway. Sometimes we use it for emergencies that we're not sure how the outcome is going to be, and so they can land on those runways instead of our primary runways. We have a UAS specific runway that's used specifically for UAS operations. You'll get into that later, but there's airspace that's specifically unique to this area right here that we use solely for UAS operations. Pulling up the airfield diagram, we're going to have lots of taxiways at Edwards Air Force Base. You have taxiway Alpha, taxiway Bravo, taxiway Charlie, taxiway Delta, which is over here. Delta's right here. Taxiway Echo, and then you have taxiway Golf over here. Excuse me. You also have tow lane Hotel. It's no longer a taxiway, it's just a tow lane now. If you look right here, the field elevation 2311 at the departure of runway 23 right. That's the highest point on any one of our runways that you're going to expect to land at. If you look right here, that's the rotating beacon. We have multiple ramps that are located off of every single taxiway. There is lots of taxiways here. Our controlled movement area is unique at Edwards Air Force Base as well. Let me pull up the lakebed diagram again. Our control movement area for Edwards Air Force Base is going to be the runway itself of lakebed or of North Base runway 624, of South Base runway 25, Main Base runway 23 left, 23 right. The Rogers Lakebed, this is called Rogers Lakebed. This entire lakebed area right here is Rogers Lakebed. And the other diagram I don't have is Roseman Lakebed, which is about 5.5 miles off the departure end of runway 23 left. And that Roseman Lakebed has one lakebed runway as well. And that is also part of the controlled movement area. Now we have a movement area, which is not controlled by air traffic control operations. Still requires approval from air traffic to enter, but it's a non-movement area. That is going to be taxiway. That's going to be all the taxiways. Taxiway Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Echo, Delta, and Golf. All of them are non-movement areas. The aircraft or they're areas where aircraft are going to move on, but they're not controlled by air traffic control. That specifically is unique to Edwards. Some other bases also have it, but in most FAA facilities and most general aviation airports, as well as most Air Force bases, those are going to be controlled movement areas. The reason it's different for Edwards Air Force Base is because you can see here all these different pads. These are different run-up pads, different utility pads for different reasons. All of those different pads have unique and specific operations that can be done on them, and there's so many of them. They cross across taxiways that at that point it would be very difficult to manage all of that from ground control. So there are specific crossing lanes where vehicles can cross without needing permission from air traffic control, but aircraft still need permission to enter these taxiways. You're going to have the ramps. So there's going to be multiple ramps. It's going to be located in your local area knowledge guide. There's going to be multiple ramps that we have on the airfield, and therefore every ramp is unique for every mission or type of aircraft. For example, this is the TPS ramp, and all of our aircraft that are going to be coming specifically for the TPS classes are going to be located in this ramp area. Our hydrogen areas, bring up the airfield diagram again. Our hydrogen area is going to be runway 23 left Hammerhead right here. There's a Hammerhead here. That's the arm D-arm area. It doesn't show it here on the map, but there's also a D-arm, arm D-arm area here, arm D-arm area here, and an arm D-arm area over here. So these arm D-arm areas are the areas where aircraft can conduct their last chance operations. If they have bombs that they're going to be dropping or testing, those are going to be armed or de-armed in those areas. They're going to have the last sweep of the aircraft to make sure everything's okay. And so those areas are designated to be specifically only used for certain operations. And so aircraft, if we're on runway 23, they're going to land. If they have an EPU activation, hydrazine, they're going to land and exit this runway, hot brakes, anything like that, any sort of emergency. Primarily, they're going to exit, get in this area. We're going to limit entry to this area at all. And then it's an isolated area where the fire department can help them work out their problem. In the event that we're on 2-3 or we're on runway 5 and these areas are not available for any reason at all, our alternate is going to be taxiway Bravo. Taxiway Bravo can be used in a pinch for any one of those operations, but it does limit us quite a bit, and there is an increased risk to everybody involved because there's less space around that area for the firefighters to work. Maintaining surveillance of the control movement area. With that responsibility, ground control has a specific responsibility as well as low control. But the surface area itself, the control movement area, is going to be the lake beds, again, the main base and south base and north base runways. Our job is to be monitoring that all the time to make sure that aircraft and vehicles are not in the same place at the same time. Making sure that vehicles have access to a runway, that there's appropriate designations for that, and that we don't ever have those two things mixing at the exact same time. That concludes episode 1. I know it's a lot of information. We're going to expand upon this tomorrow when we have our next class. If there's any questions, you need to write down those questions. Try to answer all these knowledge standards yourself, and then we can talk about these things. Thank you for listening, and have a good night.